Today on Locked On Red Wings, Suter and Chiasson rumored to not be returning. Who replaces them on the roster?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I'm a podcast producer for the Daily J, a WWJ News Radio podcast. Well, Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. And today, guys, just some stuff out of the rumor mill to kind of clean up for you guys to start off the week. Although I guess technically today's episode is on Tuesday because we skipped Monday's episode thanks to Father's Day because we record on the day before. So happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Thank you for your service, being dads. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So over the weekend, there was a report from Bob Duff that Pius Suter and Alex Chiasson were offered contracts, but have opted to pursue free agency. And Scotty, I feel as if the bulk of this conversation we're going to have today is going to revolve more around the loss of Suter than the loss of Chiasson. But to begin the conversation with, I want to talk about how, when we talked about these guys, the who should stay and who should go guys earlier in the offseason, we talked about Chiasson and we talked about Suter and how those are two guys that we wouldn't necessarily mind throwing another contract at. And it seems the Red Wings, if this report is accurate, felt the same. Suter, one, is a great two-way defensive center. That makes no sense. Two-way center. Can't be a two-way and a defensive center. A great two-way center who's fantastic on the penalty kill. And Chiasson, late in the season, was fantastic on the power play. Just power play goals left and right. And so it makes sense that a team that struggles on special teams would put an offer out there for guys who did show up for the team in those situations. Now, is it a surprise to you, Scotty, that Suter and Chiasson would opt to test free agency rather than re-sign with the Red Wings? If, again, the report is true.
Right, of course. Yeah, that's this. Yeah, this entire episode, this entire conversation is obviously based around that report that we don't have a name to the source, don't have it confirmed or anything. But I do think it's a fascinating conversation, and I think that Chiasson surprises me a little bit. Suter does not really at all. And I also think that it's important to note, we don't even know if this is 100% true. Nonetheless, what these offers were. There's a chance that the Wings, a pretty solid chance at that the Wings offer was just like a Griffin's contract for Chiasson, at least, right?
Yeah.
And I would probably, a lot of people would probably do the same thing in his shoes if he was offered an AHL deal. Would probably go, let me test the market. If I can get a two-way deal somewhere, I'm going to take that, kind of a thing. I don't expect him to get a full, outright NHL deal, but we don't know what these offers were or anything like that. So it's definitely for him, it surprised me a little bit more, but there's a chance we kind of lowballed him there. And then Suter doesn't really surprise me whatsoever. I fully expect him to have a pretty sizable market. He was a really, really good bottom six forward last season. He can play center if you need, and he played really, really good forward defense for this team. I mean, there's going to be a market for Pius Suter. That's not going to be. I enjoy hearing that the Red Wings are trying to bring him back or tried to bring him back. That's good because we've been advocating for that for months, right? You can go back to February and see us beginning to advocate for him to come back. So as far as a surprise, I would say not really, not shocking on either side, but definitely I really do want to keep tabs on Pius Suter. And when it comes to the fit of the organization, you talked about special teams and whatnot. Chiasson, I don't know, this organization is pretty big, size wise. So I'm sure if they really wanted to find another just big body to kind of fill that role that Chiasson and like Sundqvist had and whatever this season, kind of on the power play, that they could probably find that within the organization or outside of the organization. But Suter that's like very, very quietly like a pretty tough role to fill. Like that's not like you just bring in anybody to just be like, he brought really solid defense. He was a special teams contributor on the penalty kill. He did go on a heater and had some scoring in the second half there, and he can play center. That's not like those don't grow on trees, man. That's not like an easy plug and fill. Like that actually is a very difficult thing to find somebody who checks all those boxes. So, I that one, not frustrated isn't the word, but like that kind of like scares me. I really would have preferred Pius Suter be back next year.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, we don't know what these offers looked like, right? So they could have just thrown like any lowball offer at either of these guys. You mentioned Chiasson, but they could have done the same to Suter too. Like they wanted him back, but only if he would have taken a cheap deal. Listen, I know Suter's point totals didn't come near where they were in his first season with the Red Wings when he was playing 2C, but what he provided on the penalty kill and in the faceoff dot was great, which is why they reportedly offered him another contract. But in a weak free agent market, I don't blame either of these two players for betting on themselves. I mean, Chiasson, all year long he spent with Grand Rapids, he gets called up due to injury, and he just explodes for like 6 goals on the power play down the stretch. You put him out there on the power play or with an empty net or any situation where the Red Wings are up a man and he's scoring goals. I don't know, how much of that is luck, how much of that putting yourself in the right spot. It's probably a mix of both. But I can't blame either of those guys for, taking a bet on themselves to try and get a everyday NHL player contract, maybe, and multiple years at that, given, what they accomplished last year on this Red Wings team. Not that they necessarily accomplished a ton, but at the same time, on the flip side of the coin, I don't think you're necessarily losing a whole lot by losing either of these guys. It hurts your special teams for sure, Scotty, but what it does do also is it opens up, especially with talking about Suter, who was a center. Chiasson, I mean, he was a depth piece, right? Like when we talk about who replaces Chiasson, pretty much next man up, right? Yeah. Like anyone that Steve Yzerman signs in free agency. But when you talk specifically about Pius Suter, you look at the Red Wings depth and you basically have a list of 4 guys who could replace Pius Suter. And that's not even correct because 4 guys total in the organization who can play center at the NHL level. So it's really one guy who can replace Pius Suter full time on the Red Wings roster. And, those 4 centers are going to be Dylan Larkin, Andrew Kopp, Marco Kasper, and Joe Veleno. Because if you look at the other centers in their depth chart, they're not going to move Robbie Fabry back to wing. They're not going to move Michael Rasmussen back to center. I think he can, but I think his value is better served on wing. I don't even think O'Regan and Pearson and Weatherby are going to be with the organization if they still are at this point. Those contracts expired, so they're not even with the organization anymore. I just don't see, and Amadeus Lombardi's not going to be ready. There's no center in their repertoire, in their depth that is ready for the NHL level besides the 4 that I just listed. So, because this is the NHL and this is Steve Yzerman, as much as it's nice to say like, oh, well, Dylan Larkin, Andrew Kopp, Marco Kasper, and Joe Veleno is your center core, you still need guys who can play NHL caliber center when it comes time for, injuries to happen. So the question then becomes, Scotty, what type of person, what type of player, not even specifically names, but what type of player are the Red Wings going to look to sign at center in free agency? Because they're going to have to, unless you think they're just going to draft a center, but that guy's not going to be ready, not this quickly. So what kind of type of player are they going to sign in free agency to help compete for a roster spot? Because Steve Yzerman has said it before. He doesn't like to just hand positions or hand roster spots to young guys. He likes to have them work for their roster spots.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that is a really big question because it's a question of, is that addition all going to be found in one person, or is it kind of gonna kind of be like recreate them in the aggregate, to quote Moneyball? You know what I mean? Like, yes. Okay, like we're missing a guy a center who plays defense and can be on special teams. maybe we can look around and find somebody who, 2 players who fill like all 3 of those holes or whatever, instead of, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation though.
It really is. And we'll get into that on the other side of this break. But first, I got to talk to you guys today about eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that your part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Let's ride.
Let's ride. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We're talking about the departure of Alex Chiasson and Pius Suter, as it is rumored that Steve Yzerman offered them contracts, but they declined, opting for free agency. That rumor comes via Bob Duff of Detroit Hockey Now. Also in that article, it was hinted at the fact that Yzerman did not offer contracts to the rest of the pending free agents, being Adam Ernie, Jordan Osterley, Robert Haig, Mark Pysyk, Alex Nedeljkovic, and Magnus Hellberg. Does that surprise you at all, Scotty?
No. Like, honest, like, and that's no like disrespect intended or anything like that. Like, I think actually a handful of those dudes will find jobs elsewhere this summer. I think whether it's 1-year deals or 2-way deals or whatnot, but you got to realize that this team has a boatload of cap space, and after presumably not offering that group of players contracts, and now has a ton of cap space and a ton of roster space. That, you know what I mean? Like, you can't, having one of those means nothing without the other. Like, it doesn't matter if you have a ton of roster space and no cap, then who cares? And if you have a ton of cap space but only 1 or 2 roster spots, then who cares? Like, now the Wings are in a prime position to this summer really take I don't want to say like they're guaranteed to take a huge step forward, but roster turnover is now guaranteed. Like, we are going to see a ton of new faces, whether it's 1-year deals, whether it's, longer term deals, whatever. Like, new players are going to be in the winged wheel, and that's exciting. It's a little scary, and we talk about all the time how important this offseason is, but no, that none of those names really surprised me to not bring back, and I think it opens just a whole world of possibilities for this summer.
And my problem when looking at free agency, though, is just that, one, we've talked about it a bunch. There's not a lot of big names. Not that I think that Yzerman would sign a big name to replace Pius Suter. He'll probably go for somebody who's just a little bit more on the depth side of things. Like, I don't know, maybe a David Kampf, for instance, who played center for the Toronto Maple Leafs, played all 82 games for the Toronto Maple Leafs, in fact, as well. You got Max Domi out there who played 80 games, 56 points. He had a great year, and he brings a bit of an edge. He'd be a really good depth center, actually, coming to talk about it. He can also play left wing. So, I mean, there are a bunch of guys that can fill that role for the Detroit Red Wings. My question is, like, do you really want to? I mean, obviously, yes. Let me rephrase that. You want to sign centers to compete, but, you look at what this center group could look like, and Larkin at 1C, Kasper at 2C, even Kopp at 3C, or maybe find a center to replace Kopp at center and put Kopp on the wing, or find a depth center to replace Veleno and put Veleno on the wing. I mean, there's a plethora of people you can go to for this kind of thing, because God knows, Scotty, they're just so barren in the cupboard when it comes to centers at their in their own system that are, and like, so many of these guys are just never gonna get to the NHL level, or are sniffing it at this time. They just desperately need to grab somebody, a guy like maybe Sean Monahan, who only played 25 games with the Montreal Canadiens, looking for a little bit of rejuvenation in his game. He had 17 points in 25 games played. There's a lot of guys out there who are in their late 20s that are looking for a spot, but none of them are younger than Pius Suter was. So, like, I don't blame Pius Suter for walking away and trying to find a multi-year deal, but when it comes to finding depth centers, that's just not my area of expertise. You need somebody who's PK savvy, probably just because you need to replace that productivity that Pius Suter got, unless do you think that Marco Kasper is going to replace that productivity on the penalty kill?
Yeah, and the one thing that, you know, you have a little bit of an opening here to not necessarily like go out and, oh, you know, we're going to replace Pius Suter with like Ryan O'Reilly. Like, I'm, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not I'm not saying you have to jump and go all the way to the other extreme, but you do have an opportunity, cap space, roster space, etc., to kind of look more in the like, oh, maybe we go out and get somebody that's like 3 to 3.5 AAV. You know what I mean? And get somebody who maybe is a little more established, can give you a little bit more production on the offensive end, still is usable on the penalty kill. And then, like you said, if things are firing on all cylinders and like too many centers is not a thing I fear at all. Like that's a bridge we'll cross when we get to it. I would much rather have that than the current situation where we have like exactly 4 in the entire organization. So I think that there's still a lot of freedom and a lot of creativity that can come out of this situation. And again, like I still, at the end of the day, if Suter were to come back, I would still celebrate it. But this does kind of open the door to be really creative with how you want to fill out the bottom 6 of your lineup on a nightly basis. Because, well, I mean, not only Suter and Chiasson, but you just read a lot of those names were kind of bottom 6 players as well. So, you're really going into a position where you have the ability to bolster the production from your depth insurmountably from last year if you really wanted to.
I mean, one guy I really like in this free agent class is JT Compher, coming off a year with the Colorado Avalanche, and he had 56 points, played all 82 games, and that was a beat up Colorado Avalanche team too. And you know, he might end up playing more wing than he plays center with the Detroit Red Wings, but they do need that added depth. The only problem is he was not very good on their penalty kill. He's good even strength defensively. Like, his goals above replacement was very good at even strength. But when it came to his goals above replacement on penalty kill, it was like below replacement level. And if we're talking about maybe trying to replace that productivity, but then again, maybe I'm focusing too much on that shorthanded part. I probably am, because I do think Marco Kasper is going to probably replace Pius Suter on the penalty kill because of the fact that he is listed and touted as this great two-way center. Right. So maybe that's what you do. I do like the idea of getting a David Kampf from Toronto, because 28 years old, UFA, he's really good defensively, not great offensively. But you know, he had a decent season points wise regardless. 27 and 82 is fine for a depth forward. So if you really are focusing on somebody to replace that defensive style that Pius Suter brought, I think David Kampf is a really good comp.
Huh. Good one. Well, the Kasper conversation is definitely one in its own right, as far as just like filling Suter directly. And I have no doubt that Kasper is going to get a lot of a pretty legitimate look at the NHL level this fall. But I will say, like, it's a fine line. Like, I've seen so often with other organizations in this city, will say that if you put all your eggs in one basket, as far as like calling a prospect up or playing a young player, if that gets off to a slow start or doesn't work out the best, then you're just hosed. Yeah. And so and you know, Yzerman's talked about it before, kind of like not wanting to just like give young players, you know, like, oh, like you're a highly regarded prospect, you're a highly touted prospect, you just like get a roster spot. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's, even just for depth's sake, even if you're the biggest Marco Kasper fan in the world, Like I think just for the sake of depth and like injuries are gonna happen and whatnot, like I would still just would rather might be too strong of a word, but I would still also advocate for the Wings to bring in somebody who can fill that role as well, and still bring in someone who can play centering, play on special teams and whatnot. And if Kasper, bursts onto the scene and is absolutely phenomenal, then great. That's a good problem to have. You have to find a way to get all these dudes in the lineup. But I've seen this movie way too many times over the last 3 years with a different team I cover, and like I really just don't want to go down that road again.
Yeah, and like the more I think about it, and the more I'm looking at the free agent class, it's kind of crazy that Pius Suter made the decision to walk away, and that's wise. And as we're talking about it, I'm realizing how good of a position he's in. He is the youngest center on the free agent market to not be a U6 or G6 UFA.
Right.
Like he's literally the youngest, just straight up UFA on the market. And he's the only 27-year-old to have actually played more than 10 games in the NHL this season. That's on the free agent market, according to Cap Friendly. Because it's Pius Suter at 79 games played, where he was only a -3 on the Detroit Red Wings, which is incredible, followed by Radim Zohorna of the Toronto Maple Leafs, who played 10 games. After that, it's JT Compher, it's all 28-year-olds, Jonathan Drouin, guys like that.
Yeah.
So like it is kind of looking back on it. I completely understand why he decided to walk away. Now he's in a perfect position to not like secure a huge bag, but to get a nice, decent multi-year contract.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, there's been a much talk about the best prospects in the Detroit Red Wings system, and obviously there's two that come to mind. Scotty, I'm going to ask you, if you had to rank the top 3 prospects that aren't the 2 most obvious answers, who you're going to pick. So stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. And be blunt, I saw this on Reddit, stealing it from the Detroit Red Wings Reddit page. It was a good post. I thought it was clever, a good twist to talk about. The question asked, who are the best Red Wings prospects not named Simon Edvinsson and Marco Kasper?
Right.
Scotty, I'll give you one. You give me one, then I'll give you one. And we'll go like that until we each have 3. But I have a feeling we'll probably be pretty close in the list of 3. In no particular order, but still. Scotty, who are the best prospects in the Detroit Red Wings system that aren't Kasper and Edvinsson?
Yeah, well, I think for me, and like especially when you talk about the season that he had this year, I would argue, I'm trying to think if there's anyone else, because this is kind of just off the top of my head, but I'm pretty confident that if I had to make a list, number 1 would be Albert Johansson.
He's overlooked because his injuries kept him out late in the year.
Yeah,
that's a really good pick.
There, you also have to. Yes, you're totally right, and you got to remember, like, he was on such a heater that if he was healthy, there was a legitimate conversation around calling him up at the end of the season with Edvinsson and whatnot. Like, that was an actual real conversation.
Yzerman brought it up. He said that.
Yeah, he went on a huge heater there from like late January until he got hurt there.
Yeah, Yzerman brought that up in the postseason press conference, that basically if he hadn't gotten hurt, Albert Johansson probably would have gotten a call up.
Yeah.
And completely deserved, because he was playing great with Grand Rapids up until the injuries, knocked him out of play. That's a really good one. My first pick would have probably gone to Carter Mazur,
Sure.
University of Denver. He was also talked highly about by Derek Lalonde and Steve Yzerman during the postseason media availability. And
ended in GR, and that was a huge deal for him.
Ended in GR and ended well in GR.
Right. I mean, he was literally playing in the Frozen Four, and then weeks later was ending the season in Grand Rapids and looked really good.
I mean, this is a Red Wings team that lacks scoring, and this is a guy with the University of Denver who brought scoring. He had 22 goals in 40 games with the with the University of Denver, and then total of 37 points. He was great in both years with them. He got better in the second year, won the national championship in the first year. Obviously, I mean, he got his ELC signed pretty quickly after the season ended, so he could finish the year with Grand Rapids, like you said. I love Carter Mazur, and I think that he's, everyone talks about Carter Mazur, so I don't think he's overlooked, but Albert Johansson was a great pick for overlooked prospect. Who else do you think is a really good prospect in the Red Wings system that might just be getting a little overlooked, or because they live in the shadow of Edvinsson and Kasper?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess we can kind of stick with the big guys on the blue line. There's another one that I kind of want to go to as well that I'm sure after I say this will probably be your next pick, but I'm going to go with Wallander. I think that he's another dude that, I mean, he was in Rogla this year, played really well by all accounts, looked really solid yet again, continues to take steps forward. I think the biggest thing now is to just get excited about his transfer over to North American ice and kind of getting, stable here.
Yeah, I really like William Wallander too. I don't think I would honestly almost put, I want to say, my heart wants to say Amadeus Lombardi, but I think that's a stretch at this point.
That would be a take, brother. Yeah.
That would be a take. He's one of the most exciting prospects because of what he did in the OHL, and he did sign that, ELC really quickly with the team, but I don't think he is the best prospect. He has yet to prove that, although he finished the year with Grand Rapids as well. He took the step to professional hockey. I think give it another year, and if he performs really well in Grand Rapids because of his size, I think that's going to be what's going to hold him back early. If he can adjust to that in the AHL, then we have him in that conversation. But for legitimacy's sake, I mean, Sebastian Cossa is a no-brainer, right? I mean, he tore it up with Toledo after struggling early, and now he's going to probably be joining his head coach in Grand Rapids to be the goalie for the Griffins next year, as reportedly Victor Brattstrom is leaving the organization.
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, good steps for development, obviously, in Toledo this year. Started off like the very, very beginning of the season was a little shaky, and there was that weird thing where he was in GR sometimes and then in Toledo sometimes, and they were trying to get his playing time ironed out, and it kind of looked weird optically. But once Toledo hit its stride and just didn't lose for 18 straight games, Sebastian Cossa was a huge reason for that. He had I don't even remember the exact stats, but it was 3 or 4 shutouts in 10 games and had a sub 2 goals against average. He absolutely found his stride there, and the whole team seemed to at once there for that 20 game stretch. But he was a huge part of that, and really solid steps in development, I thought, taken this year. And obviously next year, hopefully he can get some more playing time in Grand Rapids and kind of solidify himself, because it'd be really cool if he was, doing well one step away,
I think another guy too that's going to be really interesting. Now, I wouldn't put him in the category of best prospect yet, but an honorable mention like Amadeus Lombardi. I think Dmitry Buchnilikov has a pretty high ceiling. The problem is we have to see at the professional level, because he played most of his season with the VHL. He did get promoted though to the KHL for this upcoming season, so we'll see what he can do. But he in the highlights he had with the VHL over there in Russia, they were unreal. But I'm pretty sure, he's, I think, a little older. I think he may have gone undrafted the year before getting picked up by the Red Wings this year. So he's got it's an uphill battle without a doubt for him. And then don't count out Dylan James yet either. You haven't heard a lot about him this year, but he's still second round pick by the Detroit Red Wings. He's still fresh. He could still prove something. But again, I wouldn't put him in the category of best yet, but more of a keep your eye on. So we'll have 2 categories here: best prospects and keep your eye on this player to see if they can take that.
We haven't talked Cross Hannes yet either. Yeah.
Well, he was injured a lot. I know Donovan Zabrongo struggled a little bit, and I think he had some injury
Hannes
problems.
Only played in 25 or 26 games for Grand Rapids this year.
Yeah, and that was I remember how excited we were come after prospect camp, because
prospect camp he was big, and preseason early stuff he was really good.
We calling him crisscross and cross crease because of passing it back door. That's great.
So that's another one. Hopefully a full healthy season of him this year in Grand Rapids too. These aren't all guys that are way, way away. We're finally at a point where these guys are a lot of them are in Grand Rapids.
But if we had to list it, create a defined list, because we had some honorable mentions in there too, a defined list of the best prospects not named Edvinsson and Kasper, it'd be Cossa, Johansson, Wallander, Mazer. Am I forgetting anyone?
No, I think that's probably it.
That's probably it. All
Yeah.
right, it might be. I'm trying to remember if I'm forgetting.
I don't know.
anyone on the list.
I don't think I'd do that order, but I think those would be the
Well,
names.
that's not in any order. I was just
Right,
listing
right.
the four
I
guys.
know. I just thought I'd add, but yeah, I think that's probably. I think there's a clear cut 4 there for sure.
All right, cool. All right, Scotty, you got any final thoughts before we sign off today?
I don't think so. We ball.
We do ball. We got another prospect preview episode for you guys tomorrow. We are scheduled to have Steve Ellis of Daily Faceoff on to preview a Musty and Brinley for you guys. So be excited for that. Stay tuned to Locked On Red Wings. Same time, same place, to your team every day.
Every day.